everyone, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Molly, also known as Mojo when I'm on the trail. In 2024, I thru hiked the entire Appalachian Trail, and today I'm going to go over how much my thru hike cost. How much a thru hike costs is going to vary from hiker to hiker, and sometimes this can be a pretty drastic difference. Not everyone has the same budget going into it, and there are other factors that play into the cost, such as how often you go into town, how much time you spend in town, how much money you spend on gear when you're on the trail, and how long it takes you to complete your thru hike, I think are some of the biggest factors that play into how much a thru hike will cost. When planning for my thru hike, I tried to look up how much a thru hike typically costs, and I watched videos like this. The goal of this video is just to kind of give you a rough idea and maybe help you figure out how much you should budget for an upcoming thru hike. When I was doing my research, I think the most common figure that I saw and heard was that it would cost roughly $1,000 a month. This seemed like a pretty reasonable estimate of how much it would cost per month, but I wasn't really sure if that took into account like the inflation and the rising cost of food and lodging that has happened over the last few years. So I wasn't sure if that was still accurate. So for me, I budgeted a little bit more than $1,000 a month just to make sure that I had some wiggle room in my budget and things like that before leaving for Georgia. So I'm going to be giving you all of the expenses that I spent on the Appalachian Trail. So from March 19th to September 11th, 2024, just the money that I spent while I was hiking the trail. So this doesn't include any of the gear that I purchased before starting the trail. I didn't include this because I spent a few years acquiring this gear and waiting for deals and watching sales and things like that. So if you were to go out and purchase everything that I brought, it would probably cost a lot more than what I actually spent because I took the time to try to save money by watching for deals and sales and getting things discounted as much as I could. I also decided not to include my transportation to and from the trail, so my flight to Georgia and then my flight home from Maine. I think that this cost can vary depending on where you live quite a bit. So I had to fly all the way across the country from Oregon, so I think that my costs are probably more than if you just had to drive a few hours if you're from Georgia or from that side of the country. So I didn't include that just because it's so different for every person. I also didn't include any of my ongoing expenses back at home. I had a mortgage payment, other bills, health insurance, car insurance, all that stuff I had to account for before leaving for the trail and try to set some money aside for some of those things, but I didn't include that in my total because again, that varies from person to person, so I didn't want to include that in my total. And the last thing that I didn't include in this total was my trip to New York City. In July, my husband flew to New York City and I took a train and we spent 4 days together in the city. I didn't include any of those expenses in this total. I didn't want to include that because I thought it would skew the numbers a little bit because it's not a super common thing for people to do and to budget for. So now let's get into what this does include. So I broke down my budget into 5 major categories that I spent the majority of my money on. The first one is lodging costs. So this would include hostels, hotels, inns, campsites, different things like that. This also includes if I stayed at a hostel and they charged for laundry or a shower, or if they had a breakfast or a dinner option that I paid for. All of those costs are in this lodging category. The next category is resupply. This includes all of the things that I bought at grocery stores or markets or gas station. This is primarily the food that I would take back on trail with me, but it would also include snacks that I would bring back to the hotel or hostel, or sometimes we would get ingredients to cook dinner at the hostel. So those costs would be in this category as well. Also, it would include if I went and got dinner from like the deli. I know I got Chinese food a few times at Ingles, so that is all in this category of resupply. The next category is going to be restaurants. The costs in this category include going out to dinner, getting lunch, ice cream, all of the deli blazing I did in New Jersey and New York, things like that. Anytime I went to a restaurant, those costs are in this category. The next category is the money that I spent on gear while on the trail. So like I said earlier, I didn't include any of the costs for the gear that I purchased before leaving for the trail, but any gear that I purchased on trail would be in this category. And lastly, I have a miscellaneous category that primarily includes things like postage, my Garmin InReach subscription, any permits that I had to get, and then anytime I would take cash out of an ATM or if I got cash back at a grocery store, I included that in this miscellaneous category. For a few years before starting the Appalachian Trail, I started saving money for this hike because I knew that it was something that I wanted to do. I didn't know exactly when it was going to happen, but I knew that I really wanted to do it. So I just started saving some money and putting it aside for when I would actually get the chance to do it. So before starting my thru hike, I had saved $7,612.87. So let's go ahead and start to get into some of the actual numbers. I am first gonna go month by month and let you all know how much I spent each month and how much I spent in each one of these categories. So the first month I was on the trail was March. I only hiked for about 13 days in March, so I obviously didn't spend as much. So I spent $160 on gear. I spent $243 on hotels and hostels. I spent only $18 eating out at restaurants. I spent $78 at grocery stores. And then I spent $25 on miscellaneous charges. So in total, that is $564 I spent in March. Next up is April. I obviously was hiking every day in April, so my costs are going to be a little bit more, but I spent $25 on gear, $294 at hotels and hostels. I spent $208 eating out at restaurants, $294 on resupply, and $224 in the miscellaneous category. That is a total of $1,044.08 in April. Up next are all of my costs from May. In May, I spent $266 on gear. I spent $467 on lodging. $235 was spent going to restaurants. $283 I spent on resupply, and I spent about $80 on miscellaneous things. So in May, I spent a total of $1,330.44. I was living my best life in May. Look at how much I spent on lodging. In June, I only spent $37 on gear, $350 on lodging, $266 on food from restaurants, $319 on resupply food, and $144 in the miscellaneous category. In June, I spent a total of $1,112.23. Up next are all of my costs from July. In July, I spent $35 on gear. I spent $475 on lodging, $209 eating out at restaurants, $350 on resupply, and $93 on miscellaneous things. So in July, I spent a grand total of $1,161.07. Up next is August. And I'm going to preface this by saying this is when I bought my Durston tent, so the amount of money I spent on gear was way more than any other month. I ended up spending $894 on gear in August. I spent $537 on lodging, $215 on food from restaurants, $355 on resupply, and $181 on miscellaneous things. In August, I spent a grand total of $2,181, and this was by far the most money I spent in a month on trail. All right, and that brings us to September, where I only hiked for 11 days. So in those 11 days, I spent $51 on gear. I didn't spend any money on lodging, but there's a little bit of an asterisk next to that because I had wonderful trail angel pay for my stay at Shaw's Hiker Hostel, so that cost was covered. I did spend some cash on a campsite at A-Ball Pines for Bebo and I because he didn't have cash. So he paid for my stay at the Appalachian Trail Hostel in Millinocket a few days after I summited to pay me back for paying for his part of the campsite. So I really did spend some money on lodging in September. It's just not accounted for here because it's in different categories. In September, I spent $84 on food from restaurants, $135 on resupply, and finally $133 on miscellaneous costs. So in September, I spent $402.53. So that is the breakdown of how much money I spent each month while on the trail. And kind of like what I was saying about what happened in September with my lodging, that kind of happened probably every month. Some of the costs aren't exactly perfect because I may have paid for someone's dinner and then they paid for part of my lodging or vice versa. Just different things like that would happen when you're hiking with a tramily. Costs just kind of get split differently and you get paid back one way or another, and it all sort of evens out in the end, but for my records, it probably isn't perfect. There was definitely some variance in these numbers, but this is just to sort of give you an idea of how much I spent. It's definitely not a perfect representation of what exactly happened. I added up how much I spent in each of these categories, and I'm gonna let you know the totals. Over my entire thru hike, I spent $1,468 on gear. I spent $2,366 on lodging, $1,233 on eating out at restaurants, $1,811 on resupply, and then $877 on those miscellaneous charges. Now, the number you have probably all been waiting for, how much did I spend on my Appalachian Trail thru hike total? Over the course of my thru hike, I spent $7,755.09. I ended up spending $142 more than what I had saved for my thru hike. So I think that is actually pretty good. With that being said, I was getting some money from YouTube from posting these videos, so I did have some revenue coming in to offset some of these costs, so I never really felt like I was going to blow my budget or anything, and I was pretty comfortable with the amount I was spending and that I was gonna be able to make it to Maine without running out of money. So some additional numbers for you. Took my total and I divided it by 6 months because that's basically how long I was out there. On average, I spent $1,293 a month on my thru hike. Divide that even more and it's about $44 per day or about $3.50 per mile. So I would say that I wasn't really depriving myself of anything while I was on the trail. Like if I wanted to go out to eat, I obviously would. I went to most of the delis and things in New York and New Jersey. Went to almost every single wayside in Shenandoah National Park. I stayed at a lot of hostels and things like that. So I definitely think that you could thru hike cheaper. You just have to make some sacrifices, take less 0 days and things like that. Because I was vlogging and posting on YouTube, I did need to stay in town and take a few more zeros probably than other people may have because I needed the Wi-Fi in order to upload and stay on top of that and everything. So there's probably some additional cost to that. But I also was very blessed and had some amazing trail angels support me throughout this hike. And you all watching and supporting me also helped immensely. So again, this is just what I spent. No two thru hikes are the same. I think everyone pretty much spends money differently and prioritizes different things while they're on the trail. Again, this is just to help give you an idea of how much it costs in 2024 to thru hike. If you're planning on hiking in 2025 or 2026, I would think that it would be pretty similar. This video really isn't about giving you tips on how to save money while you thru hike or anything like that. This is just me showing you how much I spent so that you can get an idea of what it might cost you. But if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I do my best to answer those. Let me know what you think. If you have any questions or comments, if you want to ridicule me for spending so much time in town and eating out so much, go ahead. I don't really regret any of it. I loved my thru hike and I loved all of the experiences that I had, so I don't regret spending any of this money. I think it was well worth it. Like always, thank you all so much for watching. I truly appreciate it. It makes my heart so happy that you all enjoy my videos. Mighty fine hiking, everyone. Bye!